Sir. Sir. Thank you very much.
Now over to Padmaja Madam, Vice Principal, Government Degree College, Pittapuram.
I think Principal Madam is also speaking. I think she wants to convey thanks to Teki sir.
I will continue.
Madam?
Yes. Thank you very much once again, sir. On behalf of the Government Degree College, Pittapuram, we convey our heartfelt thanks to Teki sir. Now, I request our colleague, Dr. A. Pushpalata Madam, to introduce the next resource persons, Mr. Mazhar Muhammad, on the topic Growth Opportunities in Financial Services, Industry for Young Professionals. Over to Dr. A. Pushpalata Madam.
Good morning, one and all. I would like to thankful to our principal ma'am and the organizers to introduce an eminent personality, Mr. Mazhar Muhammad. Mazhar Muhammad graduated from Andhra Loyola College, Vijayawada, Andhra Pradesh. His post-graduation is from Acharya Nagarjuna University. He qualified as a certified financial manager from Center for Financial Management, Bangalore. Mazhar Muhammad also has a PG diploma in portfolio management from Pondicherry University. In 2017, he participated in short duration executive education program in private equity and capital market financing from Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Mr. Mazhar Muhammad has close to 20 years of experience in financial markets and carried out a niche for himself as the most quoted analyst on Indian stock market in the leading business dailies of the country like economictimes.com and moneycontrol.com. He also published scores of articles in online editions of Economic Times and moneycontrol.com, including the print edition of DNA Money. For several years, he appeared as a guest in regional television channels of Hyderabad, discussing and debating on stock market, economy, and business-related topics. For a brief period of year or so, he also appeared in leading business channel of the country ET Now. Prior to establishing his own financial services consultancy firm, www.chartviewindia.in in the year 2012, he worked with Mumbai-based institutional research desks with designation of Assistant Vice President and Head of Equity Technical Research. Apart from financial markets, his personal interests including studying economic history, public policy, financial inclusion, and impact investing. That is the great contribution to the society and his concerned department. Welcome, sir. Please occupy the dais and enrich our participants. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, madam, for that wonderful introduction. I will thank Degree College Principal Madam and one and all there for giving me this opportunity. Before just starting the presentation, I want to put few words here. When Dr. B. Elia approached me to explore this opportunity, he asked me, he was expecting a presentation on stock markets and then equity research. But I felt that that topic will have a limited interest. So I just changed it to growth of financial services, because financial services is something which touches the lives of every one of us. So just these words, I like to move on to the presentation. So I just divided this presentation into 3 parts. Considering the background of our audiences, I have divided this presentation into 3 parts. One is that in the first part, I made it a point to build a case for about the importance of financial services and how they are useful to us. And then I have incorporated few slides on the few important players in the financial services, including the latest developments like online payment system, then national pension system, mutual fund industry, and then insurance industry. After that, in the third part, we will talk about regulators and then grievance redressal mechanism. That is, if you are cheated in the financial industry, how to solve those problems, to whom to approach, etc. Now, just on this topic, let me run through this presentation, and let us have some 60 more constructive minutes here. Just let us look at this quotation of Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar is a motivation coach, and now the latest words which we are using, that self-help coach, something like that. He is a good motivation speaker, and he has made many observations on how to develop our own personality. So in this regard, especially with regard to financial services, one of his popular quote is that he says that rich people have small televisions and then big libraries, whereas poor people have small libraries and then big TVs. So obviously here, what Zig Ziglar is suggesting is that about getting our priorities right. Because it is a dream of everybody. Every one of us want to be rich and want to earn money, want to save money. But we lack this system, how to build wealth to ourselves in the systematic way. So according to Zig Ziglar, the best thing is we need to give priority to our resource allocation. It means whether we should spend our money on the luxuries, or we should spend our money on something which is useful, which is likely to give us more return over a period of time. So one of the best form of investments, investing in books is considered as one of the best form of investments, because when you buy a book and then read it, the assumption is that, we will acquire enough knowledge and then discipline by which helps us in turn in developing our personality. Not essentially that by reading a book we will become richer. That's not the thing which he is trying to convey. He is talking of learning and then developing good skills, learning and then developing good skills. So which helps in developing our personality. So with that, if we explore different, apply our knowledge in economic areas also, that will in turn give us wealth. So that's why he is asking us indirectly to read more and more books as possible. Now, just before moving ahead about this presentation, just let me put out the objectives of this presentation. Now, this presentation, I made it by keeping two objectives in mind. One is to introduce the financial services industry to the young students who are both from commerce as well as non-commerce background. There are many science background students and then faculty is also there. But financial services is something which touches upon the lives of every one of us, irrespective of our professions. Therefore, whether he is a doctor, lawyer, engineer, etc., he need to know some knowledge about the financial services, because the surplus money which he has that need to be channelized for a more productive purposes. And then second objective is that, though I said that this presentation in the first objective is made by keeping our young students, this presentation has enough insights for people who are working even in the finance domain. So I have put up all the practical insights. Just let us go through it, how it is useful to all of us. Somebody may feel that I am a zoology professor, or I am a doctor, or I am an engineer, but I am not in a finance domain. So why should I bother to know about financial services? I think certainly we should bother to know about financial services. Just as I said that finance is something which touches the lives of every one of us. So if we know that, with that knowledge, what we can do is we can take control of our financial lives. Suppose, what do you mean by taking control of our financial life? We may have a son of data, so we need to plan for his higher education tomorrow after 5 years or after 10 years. So if you are aware this fact that we want to send him abroad for higher education, or we want to sponsor him for his higher education, even in the eminent institutions of the country itself, then we need lot of money. So if you know this industry very well, or if you have some knowledge of this financial services, you will be in a better position to make decisions backed by this knowledge. So that's why the first point I said that to take control of our financial life. And then second is it is important because to make better financial decisions with the confidence levels, right? Because knowledge gives us some sort of confidence. So with that confidence level, we can move ahead. And then third important point is that as a consumer, we should know about our rights. What are the rights which we are having? Because in financial services industry, which is widely dominated by the consumer segment, they are very easily become the victims of mis-selling their products. We might have, many of us might have faced this problem that somebody will say mis-sold a credit card to us, or mis-sold a insurance policy to us, etc. So in those situations, how can we get rid of this grievance? That mechanism also we will touch in the later slides. And then to protect yourself from being cheated by mis-selling, just that point I covered now. Now, one of the most important things which we come across is among the political circles that India is shining, or India is rising. So let us see the factors which contributed to this shining India. Let me put a few points here. I think today we are really, India is growing, and then financial services are growing at a much faster pace. So now any country you take, it cannot grow unless its financial system, its economy, its financial system or financial services areas keep growing. They both have the direct correlation. So since in 1991 we embraced economic liberalization, its fruits we are reaping now, and we are seeing across the board all the businesses along with financial services, our IT companies, our hospitality business, everything is caught up and then growing at a very faster pace. So actually the seeds for this growth were sown somewhere back in 1991 by embracing economic liberalization. So I think you may be knowing that great budget presented by Dr. Manmohan Singh in the year 1991. Under the stewardship of Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao. So the credit goes to these two people solely for their vision and then for their contribution or to keep Indian economy on the path of development. Because before 1991 we were having those all sorts of socialistic approach which failed to generate proper wealth to the country as well as its people itself. Businesses were not allowed to grow before 1990, but with the path-breaking deviation from its past of having the socialistic tendencies, we started embracing economic liberalization, and then we allowed the private participation of businesses. That has really propelled the growth on the very, very faster pace. Now the statistics are also clearly in front of us. Now just if we look at compare the GDP in 1992 and then GDP at today, we have achieved a remarkable pace. Suppose in 1992, the gross domestic product of the country was something like 13,671.71 billion rupees. So when we talk of billion rupees, 1 billion makes 100 crores. So it is just like 13,671.71 billion rupees was the GDP in March 1992, and till 2014 this GDP has grown to 57,417.91 billion rupees. So it is a compounded annual growth rate of 6.7% in this 22 years. Now small clarification I want to give here. I have not taken the GDP of 2017 or 2018, the latest figures. The reason is that while comparing the past historical data to arrive at a right comparison, we need to convert this historical data to the base year prices. So in recently 2010 to 2011, we changed, in 2014 or 15, we changed the base year to 2011 to 12. But the historical figures, I did not find that on the RBI website. I think they are yet to work out the historical figures, because whenever we change the base year, we try to recalculate the historical figures from 1950 and try to adjust them to the base year figures so as to adjust account for the inflation. So that will help us in making a right comparison. So since this 2014 to from 1950 to 2014 historical data, we converted into the base year figures of 2004 to 2005. Here comparison is very apt. It is adjusted to the inflation figures. Therefore, based on that, I can say that in the 22 years of from 1992 to 2014, the Indian GDP has started growing at 6.7%. So over a period of say 22 years, if this is the growth rate, I think this is a decent thing to say that India is on a path of growing, and then we can see that in our society itself, because everybody else, almost all the individuals around us, their standards of lives are going up. So by looking at that factor also, we can easily conclude that we are on a growth path, and we may continue to grow like this for several years going forward. So another point which contributed for this growth is catching the information technology revolution at a much earlier at much earlier stage. Because once in 1991, the liberalization has happened in 1991. So after that, private people were allowed to participate in the businesses and then expand their businesses as anything. So in this relation, we can quote our own Infosys and then Mr. Narayan Murthy, because they out of his vision, he took this Infosys company somewhere in 94 or 95 to the capital markets, and he borrowed a large, they needed money from the capital markets, invested, and then built that company. And the best thing which Mr. Murthy did is that he shared his wealth with his middle class employees. With all his employees, he has given something called as employee stock options. So he made them part owners by giving, by allocating the shares, by allocating shares in that company, which kept the path of middle class people which accelerated the path of richness to the middle class people. Because at much earlier stage, once these IT companies started making money and sharing their wealth with these employees in the form of employee stock option scheme, what we started seeing is that the richness level, I mean the path to prosperity is really shortened. Every young man started becoming almost rich by 30-35 years. At least people who are working in this IT domain. Over a period of time, this also spread to other sectors also, because even today the teachers, lecturers, professors, they are paid very decently. They get a decent pay packages right across the fields. So that has helped them, to improve their standards of living dramatically. So these are two factors. One is that embracing liberalization in 1991, and then catching on to the IT revolution at a much earlier stage. And then another hidden factor which is helping India is that demographic profiles, meaning the population of India, almost 60% of the people are below the age of 30 years or so. Now here when we say that the larger population of the country is much younger, it means that their productivity level will be higher. The only thing is that we need our youngsters to concentrate on in educating themselves in proper channels. one big disadvantage thing which I see is today almost all the youngsters are busy with the smartphones, playing games, and then getting themselves in this, keeping themselves busy with WhatsApp wars, etc. Right? These things are definitely in certain Western countries. Why I am mentioning this negative point here is that because in the Western countries, it is some companies did a research, and that research found that the productivity levels are coming down among the young people. The productivity levels are negatively correlated to the gaming industry, because as more and more gaming apps are developing, you know, these people are spending their more time, they are becoming somewhat addicts to this mobile games, they're playing games on smartphones, computers, etc. So I think that is the only negative factor when we talk about this demographic profile advantage. So as long as, you know, these things are, their energy levels are very productively channelized in a very constructive way, then I think that we can expect economies to grow at a much faster pace. And then another, see how wealth is getting created in India. So the number of high net worth individuals in India is also increasing. There is a consultancy called Knight Frank. Recently, they released a report, Knight Frank Wealth Report 2020. I am quoting these statistics from their report. Actually, in India, we don't have a proper definition of who is an ultra high net worth individual or a high net worth individual. Now, you know, when we talk of ultra high net worth individual, based on the international norms, this ultra high net worth individual is someone who is having an investable surplus of $30 million. So $30 million, a person who has $30 million, if you convert that dollars into rupee at 70 rupees per dollar, then it is somewhere roughly around 210 crores. So a person who is having a wealth of 210 crores is considered as an ultra high net worth individual based on the international standards. Now just let us see where India is standing here. Just now I told you in the previous slides that our prosperity levels are going up because of the liberalization. Now if we see into this ultra high net worth individuals list, India is ranking 12th in that list. So there are altogether 5,981 individuals in India who owns more than 200 crores of money. So that number is investing. So it means that the importance is that, you know, that wealth will again reinvested in creating businesses. So it means in turn those businesses will generate employment opportunities. So it is just like a cycle, you know, it is just like a cycle which will keep on having positive impact on other things also. So in India we have 5,981 individuals, and this number of ultra high net worth individuals is expected to increase to 10,354 by 2024. I think this report is might have not factored the recently released these things. What is recently the damage done by the COVID. So even then I tell you, even if you factor in the damage done by the COVID crisis, this number will likely to go up, because of this crisis, you know, it is the poor and the middle class people who are getting impacted a lot, but not the high rich people, right? So even if their wealth is not going to grow up, the number of people may not grow up by another 73% in next 5 years, let us say. They may grow, they may take in next 6 years or 7 years, we may have this kind of number. It means prosperity is coming to India at a faster pace. Now how India stands when compared to other countries. So let us just see that USA, we have 2.4 ultra high net worth, 2.4 lakh ultra high net worth individuals, and in China we have 61,587 ultra high net worth individual. Always we try to compare ourselves with China, but China is growing at a much faster pace, and China is having 61,587 high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals, whereas India has only 6,000 ultra high net worth individuals, right? And China's GDP is 14 trillion dollars, whereas India's GDP is only $3 trillion. So growth rate, you know, for India the room for catch up is much higher. So as we start growing to much higher levels, this number of ultra high net worth individuals will also keep moving higher and then higher. And then in the year 2019 alone, 31,000 additional ultra high net worth individuals were added to this kitty, bringing down the total number of ultra high net worth individuals across the world to 5,13,200. So these are the statistics from Knight Frank Wealth Report of 2020. And then it is not that just in India everybody is growing. So that is not true. Wealth is getting concentrated only in the hands of few people. So now let us just focus on what can there is too much inequality in India, and what we can do to reduce this inequality. So the facts about this inequality I am quoting from another report called Oxfam International Report. This report was released recently in January 2020. So Oxfam International Report says that wealth is getting concentrated in the hands of few in India, because they are quoting the statistics they are saying, and these statistics are true also. 77% of the total national wealth is estimated to be in the hands of 10% of Indians. Only 10% of the Indians owns total 77% of the wealth produced in the country. So there is a huge deviation here. Now 73% of the wealth generated in the year 2017 went to the richest 1%. So richest 1% took a share of 73% of the total wealth which was generated into the 2017, and then remaining 27% is shared by other 99%. So there is a too much deviation here. Then bottom 50% of the population owns a meager 5.8% of the national wealth. So what is that we can do to reduce this kind of inequality? So that's why we talk of financial inclusion. When we say that financial inclusion, it means, in simple words, financial inclusion means bringing everyone into the fold of a banking system, or into the system of financial domain. If you bring in everyone, that will have different kind of advantages. What are those things? What Government of India is doing to include the financial inclusion? We will see that. And the international definition of financial inclusion, if you want, I can give you. That is that financial inclusion means creating a transaction-based account. So in other words, creating a bank account to the weaker sections, to all, especially to the weaker sections of the population. Suppose the best example I can give is, suppose a maid works in our house. She may not have a bank account. She may not own a bank account, right? But a watchman who is working in our apartment, let us say, he may not own a bank account. A car driver may not own a bank account. But there are great advantages if these people are brought into the banking fold. That is why we are saying financial inclusion is creating a transaction-based account to all, especially to the marginal classes of the society. Because once you have the accounts, bank accounts to all the sections of society, that there are many other multiple advantages. I will cover them at a later stage. Just now let us cover few points which what Government of India do to include this for the financial inclusion, right? So in 2014, Government of India launched Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana to provide universal banking services to all. So according to this scheme, you know, they said that they felt that we should have, they created it like a machine to create a mission. They created like a mission to create accounts to all the people in the country. So for that purpose, a digital pipeline is established for implementation of this PMJDY, popularly known as PMJDY, that is Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. Right, a digital pipeline was established to open the accounts by linking mobile and then Aadhaar to this Jan Dhan account. That's why in 2015, 16, 17, we had all the government campaigning that we should give an account to everybody. Now, according to somewhere other World Bank report, India joined among those countries like China, Vietnam, Chile, Taiwan, etc., whose population owns some 80% of the account. I mean, 80% of the population is covered with the bank accounts. So India joined that club of 80% who own 80% of the population who owns bank account. Now see the advantage of this, because the main advantage is this: if everybody has bank accounts, then this digital payments, online payment system, that is the next level. We can proceed to the next level of this banking. That once you are empowering each and every individual in the country with a bank account, then their life will become very easy. Because they may have some surplus money. That surplus money can be channelized to other productive purposes through the savings mechanism, and based on their bank account, they may get they may apply for some loans. And then another main advantage of financial inclusion by opening an account to the economically weaker sections is that instead of giving subsidies, government is directly transferring money in their accounts. So that direct transfer of money will help them in multiple ways. So they can choose their priorities, how to invest this money, and if there is any surplus also, because that amount can be invested in other financial instruments also. This is the main advantage. And because of this financial inclusion thing, in Hyderabad, my own observation is that, suppose you go to any small shop, everybody is using Google Pay mechanism, because at least in this area, I have seen so many, so many small shops, with so many small kiosks, let us say small shops which sells cigarettes or pan, this kind of thing. They are accepting payments on Google Pay, right? And then curry pints which sell for 30 rupees or 40 rupees, those curries, they are accepting the payment over Google Pay, right? And then small shopkeepers, kirana shop walas, they are accepting payments through Google Pay. So it means, I tell you, this is working, this is doing wonders, I tell you. This is accelerating, this scheme is on the right path, and as we succeeded in bringing all the small and then weaker sections of the society into this fold, I think we can say that the financial inclusion, though there can be a lot to do, but the initiatives of the government are working wonderfully well, and then that is on the right path. And then that's what I said that about savings. So then Government of India also launched the social security schemes like PM Suraksha Bima Yojana, right? The PM Suraksha Bima Yojana, and then PM Jeevan Jyoti Yojana, Atal Pension Yojana were launched. These are just like some pension kind of schemes or insurance kind of schemes to secure to give protection to the families of the poor people. So in short, for financial inclusion, government is doing very well by creating accounts to all the people through this Jan Dhan Yojana scheme, and then by launching few security, social security schemes also, like giving pensions, etc. Right, this is under policy push. Now, on the back of this introduction, let me introduce the financial system, ecosystem of the financial services. So mainly in financial services, what we have is broadly we can divide these financial services into three different segments. One is the capital market segment, Another is the second one is the insurance segment. Third one is the NBA, non-banking finance companies. So under this capital markets, in simple, I will put it as previous speaker Dr. Teki was saying that there are two sections in the society. One is savers, another is borrowers. One is savers, another is borrowers. So this capital markets act as a mechanism or medium through which the surplus money flows to the borrowers, right? That can be in any form. So under broadly, under capital markets, we have things like asset management companies. These asset management companies are the mutual funds, which helps in generalizing, which helps in collecting the small savings of from multiple people, like you and me, from thousands of people. They collect a small savings, because investing in mutual funds, we can start investing in mutual funds with as low as 500 rupees. Also, we can invest in mutual funds and take the benefit by participating in the well-established financial markets, like say equity markets or debt market, etc. So that job is done by these asset management companies. So these are nothing but mutual funds, let us say popularly known as mutual funds. And then second, we have stockbroking firms. These stockbroking firms also, if you are somewhat if you are knowledgeable, and then you know, you can start investing your money. You can start investing your money into the stock market directly by opening an account with the stock brokers. Right, stockbrokers. So for that, you need to. There are certain conditions which are KYC related norms you have to fulfill, and then you need to open a Demat account, because Demat stands for dematerialization. Earlier we used to have everything in the proper form, in the paper form. Now we have gone digitalized. So those certificates will be held in the digital form, just like your bank accounts. So you need to open a Demat account and then a trading account with the broker, and then you can start trading. So that comes under these things, capital market segment. And then another thing is we have wealth management. So this wealth management means, just in the previous slides we have covered about ultra high net worth individuals. So as the count of ultra high net worth individuals grows, then what happens means they will be in need of assistance of other professionals to provide some exclusive services to them. Because a person who has more money, let us say even 20, 30, 40 crores also, he may need the assistance of a finance professional to deploy that money in various financial instruments, so that, you know, they can take advantage by gaining more than the bank interest. So here wealth management firms cater to the needs of wealthy individuals by acting as their personal finance advisors. By acting as, it can be about investing in the financial markets, maybe directly about equities, or it can be about in mutual funds, or in the government debt, or in any other form of bonds, or getting an advice in the form of tax advice, or helping up in drawing a succession plan, making a will, etc. So all those needs are taken care of by wealth management firms. And I think in the beginning of this beginning of this workshop, just our madam introduced in her introductory lecture, she said that there are enormous opportunities for wealth management industries. Yes, that is true. As India, as the country grows on the path of prosperity, I think the demand for wealth managers and then financial professionals will also keep increasing and then increasing. And then other two functions are just like merchant bankers. We have investment bankers, that they will help channelizing the savings to the business class, whether in the form of an IPO, etc. They help businesses to garner huge, to raise a huge chunk of funds. And then we have rating agencies. The job of these rating agencies is to study, and then if somebody want to raise money from the capital markets, then these rating agencies study those companies and give a rating saying that it is worthy of investing or not. Right? If they feel that the company has problem, they will openly warn the people that this company has a so and so problem. So investing in that company may not be a good advice. So like that, rating agencies also play a good role. Then another segment we have insurance. This insurance is a recently in 2001, this insurance sector was privatized. Though India has insurance companies from 1950s in the form of Life Insurance Corporation and then others which are owned by Government of India, but it was open for private players in 2001. Now many people may have skepticism whether I should buy insurance from from a private player or I should go to LIC. For this purpose, let me give you one best practical example. Now we have private banks. Now we have private banks like HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, Axis Bank, etc. And then these banks were mostly privatized maybe in after 1992. Right? So maybe in 94, 95, if somebody compares a newly formed HDFC Bank or ICICI Bank with the well-established giant like State Bank of India or bigger banks like other PSU banks like Bank of Baroda or Punjab National Bank. So in 95, we may have that kind of doubts whether I should go for a private banker or not. But now see, fortunately after 20 years, without any hesitation, what we are doing is obviously these private bankers emerged as a preferred choice of service providers for all of us, because now nobody is preferring government banks. People are preferring more and more private banks unless they have some issues with them. Right? So why I am quoting this point is now private insurers are placed just like are positioned just like private banks were positioned way back in 1995 as the 1995. So just after seeing the growth and then progress of private bankers, what kind of services they are providing, how big they have become, how reliable they have become to every one of us. So from this example, we can learn that we need not entirely depend on Life Insurance Corporation itself. We can trust the private insurers also. Without any hesitation, we can go. And definitely, I can say that 20 years down the line, private bankers will have a much, private insurers will have a much bigger share than Life Insurance Corporation of India. Unless Life Insurance Corporation of India learns lessons from this episode, how PSU bankers lost their market share. These things will also continue to lose its shares, and hopefully so they should learn some lessons from this PSU bankers and do some utmost needed things to retain its market share. Already, though insurance companies were established, privatized in 2001, now slowly these private players are eating into the market share of the Life Insurance Corporation. So in detail we will see in the next slides about these insurance companies. And then the third segment is the non-banking financial companies. These non-banking financial companies are not the main difference. They also perform functions like a bank only, but the main difference is that they cannot accept these the main difference is that banks can accept different types of accounts like savings account and then fixed deposits, current accounts, etc. Right? Whereas NBFCs may go for time deposits, they can't open accounts just like the banks. Right? When I say the time deposits, maybe they also raise money from the public like you and me in the form of NCDs, non-convertible debentures. But they are not allowed to borrow directly from the public, just like as banks are doing by opening the savings account and then current account for businesses, etc. So that is the only difference. All other differences are that all other functions performed by NBFCs are more or less the same what a banker does. Another advantage is that NBFCs try to cover all those the neglected sections of the society who fails to get services from the banks. Suppose if you want to get a loan, if a self-employed person who is working in, who is not employed, let us say, who is a blue-collar job holder. For a blue-collar job holder employee, it may be difficult for him to comply with the all the banking norms, etc., and get a loan. But the job will be, but NBFC person will be more willing to give him a loan and then make some money out of that. Okay, so this is the difference between the two. All other main difference, and then all other functions are done by the NBFCs are similar to the bankers. So in these NBFCs, we have separate classifications like asset finance companies. It means they tend to finance only for a particular segment. Let us say that we have auto finance companies. They will give loans only to the automobile, so for buying car or for buying a truck, something like that. Because they draw comfort in lending money to those to purchase vehicles. That is to them collectively we can term them as asset finance companies. And then investment companies. Some NBFCs are formed as investment companies, because these investment companies, their job is they may invest in their primary mandate can be to invest only in the stock securities market or financial instruments, and they can also invest in land, etc., real estate business, etc. Some of them register themselves as NBFCs. And then there are loan companies, right? There are loan companies, just we covered that. They may give loan to just the general public, right? Another difference is that cost of borrowing of the NBFCs will be much higher than compared to the banks. The reason is simple. When a banker takes money from you and me, he pays only, nowadays they are paying only 2.5% on that. So it means the huge pool of money which they are getting from the public, they will lend it at 8% or 9%. See the margin gap. At least some part of this, the cost of funding is becoming very, very cheap. And for current account holders, they won't pay even the 2.5%, 3% interest also. The interest rate for businesses who open a current account and do transaction, that is zero with the banks. So their cost, whereas since NBFCs cannot have the privilege of borrowing money from these people, so what happens is that their cost of borrowing, they raise money in the form of NCDs, or they borrow from other purpose, other entities, and then they lend it to the other people, unbanked people primarily. So the cost of borrowings from NBFCs will be go up. And then second point, let us see in this financial services only, what kind of investment avenues we have. We have what kind of investment avenues, and then we are talking of something called as financialization of savings. Because now as the economy and then income levels are growing up, our the instruments, financial instruments in which we can save are also increasing drastically. So just let us see what kind of financial instruments we have. Now, as country is on the path of prosperity, our savings to GDP ratio is measured as 30%. We are saving a lot, and that savings pool is 30% of the total GDP which we are earning. So our GDP is something like $3 trillion. So 1 trillion means 1 lakh crores. So 1 lakh crores, it is something like $3 trillion. So out of those $3 trillion, roughly 30% is the money which India is saving. That is with the people household savings, we can say, right? Major chunk belongs to maybe households only. So there is 30%. This 30% need to be channelized. If we just keep that 30% in the bank account, it doesn't serve the purpose of the economic development. That amount need to be channelized for much bigger productive purposes. like investing in the businesses, etc. Then only prosperity will come to both the investor as well as to the country. So mostly when we talk of investment avenues, the traditional investment avenues which people used to have is just like if you have some surplus money, Indian mentality was that I should buy in a I should invest in gold. I should buy some gold. And if the pool is surplus amount is much larger, then they used to say that I should invest in a real estate, right? Or if he is a very conventional guy, very conservationist, who doesn't want to take any risk, so he used to go and then open the fixed deposit. But nowadays, the things have done dramatically. Sea change we are seeing, because if you want to own a second house, real estate prices are touching almost sky high levels. So it is becoming a very bigger investment, and then rental yield will be drastically low, sometimes less than FD rates also. But if you want to go for safety and then invest that money in the form of fixed deposit, banker is paying you not more than 5 to 7%. State Bank of India is paying you only something like 5.25 or 5.5%, whereas some private banks like Yes Bank, IDFC Bank, etc., they are paying 7% or so, right? So there is a savings, especially retired persons, they used to depend on fixed deposits, right? So if they put their money in the fixed deposit, if they get 5%, that may not meet their ends. So if they are ready to take some amount of risk, there are other securities, safe securities also. Then we will try to explore where we can invest. Right. So just see some of the best investment avenues are stock. One is that popular avenue is that equity market, stock markets. Now when we talk of stock markets, it is a high risk game. If we invest in the stock markets without having a proper knowledge, then believe me, your 10 lakh will become 5 lakhs in no time. So stock market is not meant for everyone, and making money in the stock markets without having knowledge of the company in which you are investing is bound to create problems to you. So investing in the stock market directly is entirely a different ballgame, and it is not an everybody's cup of tea. So that is one. And then second thing is mutual funds, right? So second point is, I don't know in which company shares to buy. A person may have a question like this. I don't know in which company shares I want to buy, but I want to take part in the equity growth. I want to take part in the growth of equity market, because every day I am seeing the markets going up higher and higher. Is there any option? Yes, there is an option. You can take exposure to the mutual funds through to the equity markets by taking exposure to the mutual funds. That amount, what you can do is you can buy some mutual funds, mutual funds. So if the company and then fund manager in which you are investing, and if you have a time horizon of 3 to 5%, then you are going to get a better return than what is the bank FD rate. So don't think that there is a misunderstanding about all the people that by investing in stock markets, people will become overnight rich. But take it from me as a stock market professional, right? Take it from me, it is not easy to make money in the stock market. By overnight, you may become proper, right? So you may end up losing everything overnight. So don't venture into stock markets without having a proper knowledge of that. Okay. So the best way to take is exposure to the equity markets is mutual funds. In these mutual funds also, if you wait for 3 to 5 years kind of time horizon, you may get a better returns 15 to 20%. Right? If somebody is making overnight money, that is an exceptional thing. More higher returns, that is an exceptional thing. That is not a consistent process. Right? Nobody will make consistently in the stock market. So you need to take a time horizon of something like 3 years or 5 years, and then keep continuing with that equity asset class. Then you will make more money. Then third way of making money is that savings cum protection plans of the insurance companies. Right, these insurance companies, they cater to the needs of both low risk investors as well as investors with little bit of high risk investors who are capable of taking somewhat high risk, because most of the insurance companies have guarantee plans. In these guarantee plans, what they will do is that after 10 years, 15 years or 20 years, they will commit that they will do some X amount. After that, they will write a bond, and it is a very good mechanism. Whatever they are committing, they are going to deliver, and they will deliver also, no doubt about it. Right? They will continue to deliver also. There is no doubt about it. So we need not develop a mistrust about those kind of instruments. Mostly, why they give guarantee is that the major almost entire amount they go and then invest in the government debts or debt securities, right? So this we are not going to, the government is not going to default, and government is not going to say that we will not pay you, right? That day will never arise, right? Because it is very rarely that companies will go or countries will go bankrupt, right? That is a very, very rare thing, right? So 99.99 times we will bound to get these guaranteed payments to us. And then second point is nowadays the government of India, just to reduce this discourage the physical buying of to reduce physical buying of this what is that gold, government of India started issuing sovereign gold bonds. Right, this sovereign gold bonds issue comes at regular intervals, and these things, the best thing is that instead of buying gold, physical gold, you can buy these sovereign gold bonds. Go to any big bank when the issue is open, you can go there. Then you can go there and then you can invest in the sovereign gold bonds. Another best advantage is that if you buy a physical gold, nobody will pay you the interest. But when you own a sovereign gold bond certificate issued by Government of India, I think they will also pay you something like 2% or 2.5% interest. And then whenever you want to sell that at market rate, that certificate you can sell it to the bank itself. Then they will give you the market rate, whatever is prevailing at that point in time. So this also prevents you from the fear of theft, because we are owning a certificate here, right, which is there in your name. So unlike a physical gold, there is no fear of theft here if you own a sovereign gold bond. And then similarly, the companies, while talking about NBFCs, I told you that they raise money through this, what is that, non-convertible debentures form. So this is one of the instruments in which, which will try to give you better returns when compared to this, when compared to what is that, fixed deposits, right? So these NCDs also, while buying NCDs, what we need to do is we need to check for credit rating given by the agencies, right? Mostly it is presumed that AAA rated securities are somewhat worthy of investing. So in AAA rated bonds we can issue, we can invest, where I tell you the chance of getting our investment back will be very, very high. And let me also make it very clear here. When we say that AAA rated bond, it doesn't mean that there is a blanket guarantee like a fixed deposit that you are bound to get it back, right? Sometimes, maybe some 5%, or very rarely, in the very rare cases, companies, AAA rated securities started defaulting. Now, very recently, in the last couple of years, we are seeing this problem, especially in September 2018, we have the collapse of a big, largest NBFC called IL&FS, right? So that IL&FS, big giant NBFC, it collapsed in September 2018. So I think that their debt was rated something like AAA, right? That was changed later. So there can be some unforeseen events. They are very rare events. Now regulatory mechanism is also tightening. Therefore, in future we can believe but we need to be prepared that some 5%, 95% we can believe that it will come back to us in AAA rated securities, and 5% we need to be very skeptical. If we don't want to take that kind of risk also, then the best thing is to go and invest in the fixed deposits in a government bank, right? More than that we can't have anything. Then corporate bonds, these companies also, they will, whenever they need money, they will issue those things. And then second, recently governments started issuing these infra bonds to invest in these infrastructure projects, because huge thousands of crores are required there. So governments, what they did is, if we invest in this infra bonds, they are giving tax incentives also. So for the taxpayers to save their tax, these infra bonds can be one of the options, provided government gives incentive of tax savings. Right? These things keep on changing in every budget. Right? So next thing is government securities. Now even we can buy in the primary market. Primary market means whenever government is issuing a bonds to you, the G-Sets also we can buy. I think NSE, National Stock Exchange of India, also started a platform where we can bid for the primary debt and then directly invest in the, even retail investors can invest in this government debt. This is the most safest debt. These are the different avenues where we can invest in the finance. That is why we are saying financialization of savings here. So when we say financialization of savings, more money is nowadays coming into financial instruments rather than going into traditional asset classes like gold, real estate, etc., etc. So that's why we are saying it is financialization of savings, because our savings are taking the shape of one or the other financial instrument. Then let us see what the latest trends in this industry. So what kind of things we have now? The latest development is that just earlier I told you about Google Pay, how small businesses are embracing this technology, and this online payments are becoming popular even with a very, very small segment of population who are poor and then uneducated also. So now see the mechanism here. The main force which is behind, which is translating that dream into reality, or providing lot of dream into reality by providing infrastructure support, is called as National Payment Corporation of India. Right? So this National Payment Corporation of India, somewhere in 2007 or 2008, it was established by Government of India with a separate act. So these people they are operating retail payments and then settlement system. They are giving guarantee. They are acting as a guarantee for the settlement, etc. Therefore, that is giving boost and then confidence to the industry, so that we can go out and then make online payments without any fear. Now, these online payments, see the popularity of these online payments. In 2019 alone, retail customers did combined transaction volumes of 20 trillion. This is volume, I mean number of transactions which are done. Okay, 20 trillion transactions were done in the year 2019 itself. So when we talk of a trillion, I told you that it is a 1 lakh crores. 1 lakh crore is referred to as a trillion. So it is a 20 trillion number of transactions were done in 2019 alone, which has a combined value of 54 trillion rupees. Okay, these are in rupee terms. So 54 trillion rupees we have, which has a combined value, and then all the transactions are being done with this through these four ways. One is that we have this UPI. You may be popular with this UPI, right? Unified Payment System. And then those who are going through online now, IMPS is a. You also know about IMPS transfers, that is immediate payment system. And then credit card and debit card. And then here I have written, because this UPI in the serial order, because this $54 trillion payment, the highest chunk of payment was done through UPI. Out of this $54 trillion, major payments were done to through UPI. I think UPI, if you have that code, you can also pay. You may be taking already using them through your mobile. So it is the most easiest form. That's why it is garnering the highest chunk out of this $54 trillion. And the second is through IMPS we are doing that. And then third form, third share credit cards occupied the third place in this 54 trillion rupees. And then fourth is the debit card. Right, the fourth is the debit by way of the debit card. And then 4.98 million point of sale POS terminals are employed as in December 2019, which is a 39% growth when compared to the 2018 figures. So just imagine 4.98 million. There is a lot of room for growth here. So 4.98 million is roughly, I think it is 50 lakhs. Okay, only 50 lakh POS terminals are deployed with the merchants. Whereas we have a huge population of 120 crores. So in future, if the businesses grow, as the awareness grow, there is a huge room for improvement in this segment also, which is already growing by 39%. And then if you look at the banks which are providing support to this, I think out of these things, this RBL Bank, HDFC Bank, SBI, Axis, and then ICICI emerged as top 5 merchant acquiring banks in 2019. Right? These are the top 5 banks who emerged as the merchant acquiring banks. See, whenever you visit what is that, any store or any mall, you might have done a transaction, or with that small machine, right? Through your debit card or credit card, that is POS terminal. Okay, and this merchant acquirer means a bank which is maintaining the account of that merchant. In simple words, a bank which has the business account of that particular storekeeper or mall owner, etc. So these are the merchant acquirers. They will give guarantee that you accept these cards, right? You accept these cards. We will facilitate your online transaction. So the key role which being played are these the top 5 banks. RBL Bank, this is called Ratnakar Bank Limited, which is based out of Maharashtra, and then HDFC Bank, and then State Bank of India, Axis, and then ICICI Bank, right? So it is good to see a small bank taking a lead here. And then recent development is that you may be aware of regional rural banks, especially commerce people or economics background people. They may be aware of this concept of regional rural banks. So recently RBI allowed these regional rural banks who are operating in these villages, etc., rural economy, to act as merchant acquirers. So if these regional rural banks are given that power, it means slowly if they acquire, if they become the merchant acquirers, it means they are introducing indirectly online payment in the rural areas also. They are introducing the online payment in the rural areas also. So that's how RBI's step of allowing RRBs is helping this digitalization of the rural economy. Now especially these we may be knowing these BHIM apps, etc. Right? They are becoming very popular now. Now these statistics, whatever I have quoted here, they are quoted from the sources like National Payment Corporation of India, Reserve Bank of India, and then there is something called as a World Line Digital Payments Report. Right? This World Line Digital is studying all these online payment systems or online companies. So they released their report in the 2019. From those reports from these 3 sources, I have quoted these transactions to you. Then in the next slide we will see National Pension Scheme. Right, this is National Pension System. Recently, every employee is getting affected with this. Right, so this is a new form of National Pension Scheme was launched by Government of India in 2004. Initially, it was limited to government employees itself. Initially, it was limited to government employees itself, but in 2009, it was open for all citizens. Even non-government employees who want to save for their retirement, they can think of opening a NPS account. Mainly people in the age group of 18 to 60 years can open this NPS by opening an account with POP. POP means point of presence. Usually banks and then financial institutions act as POPs. So 18 and then 60-year-old, they can go and then open the account. Minimum amount which is required to invest in this system is only 6,000 rupees per year. So if any year you defaulted, you have to pay. If you discontinue the payment, then your account will be frozen temporarily till you start making repayment by paying a penalty. Right? For any year, in any year, for any reason, if you don't want to invest, then what happens? If you are unable to invest, then your account will be frozen. But again, you can continue reinvesting by paying a penalty of rupees 100. And mainly this NPS system offers two types of accounts. One is tier 1 account, another is tier 2 account. So in this tier account is a mandatory account. There are withdrawal restrictions. The main difference between tier 1 and then tier 2 account is that is based on the withdrawal request. Tier 2 account is voluntary, whereas tier 1 account is mandatory. In these things, you cannot withdraw your money. There are many restrictions on withdrawal your money. Even on retirement also, you are not allowed to take entire corpus. You are not allowed to take entire withdraw 100% of your corpus. I think there you can withdraw 60% and then remaining 40% you need to buy something called as annuities. These annuities you need to buy from the institutions which were recognized by PFRDA, that Pension Fund Regulatory Development Authority. We will touch this point in next slides. Right? So there is something called as PFRDA which is governing this NPS system. So that has recognized some 9 institutions, financial institutions. They are mostly into insurance type of business. Right? So these 9 institutions, from these 9 institutions, you need to buy something called as annuities, so that out of that, the return made out of that will be given to you as pension. That's how now the pension system has changed now. Because in good olden days, government used to give you some to the retired employees some fixed amount. Right, I think mostly before 2000 that the employees who retired around 2000 or so, they have that facility. They used to enjoy that benefit throughout their life. Even if there is a dependent daughter or wife, even they used to get the benefit out of that. Now all those things are gone now. Now this is the new system. So mostly new employees are getting affected. Affected means they found a new way of making their investment, new and then realistic way of making investments and then deriving benefit out of this. And then there are we have touched upon mutual fund industry earlier. Now let us see some statistics belonging to this mutual fund industry so that we can get an idea of how big it is. Right, as on 31st August 2020, the assets under management, we call it as assets under management, that is the amount collected by the mutual funds put together, that is something like 27.49 trillion rupees. So as on 31st August 2020, mutual funds are collectively managing 27.49 trillion rupees. The number of folios issued as on 31st August today, 925.70 trillion. 925.70 trillion is the number of folios which are issued. What is a folio? Folio is just like a bank account. Right? Whenever you buy when we go to a bank to open an account, they will give you an account number. So similarly, when you buy mutual funds from a mutual fund company, you will be given a folio number which has a unique identity. So in future, if you lost the documents, but if you remember the folio number, based on that folio number, we can identify how much amount you have invested and when it will mature and how much you will get back. So the number of folios issued by the mutual fund is 925.70 trillion in number. Then individual investors, people like you and me who are investing in this, out of this total assets of $27.49 trillion, the individuals invested something called as 52.9% of the total assets as on July 2020, whereas institutional investors like companies, and they include sometimes foreign portfolio investors also, that 47.1%. Right, and then 59% of the assets of individual investors are from top 30 cities in the country. Right, whatever are the top 30 cities, the 59% of the assets of individual investors are coming from the top 30 cities, and whereas remaining amount is accounting from B30 cities. That is beyond these top 30 cities, we are calling them as B30, and then 94% of the institutional business is coming only from P30 cities. These things, you know, T30, B30, right? These figures are important, and indirectly they suggest that there is much room for expansion of these businesses, these industries in many small towns. Right? That is the purpose here of highlighting these things. Right? If the major business is coming from only P30, beyond a point we can't depend on them for the business. Right? So we need to look into the smaller and smaller segments also of the countries and then regions. Right? From there we need to secure the business. All these statistics I have taken from the Association of Mutual Funds of India. And then let us see some insights about the insurance industry. Right? So life insurance industry's assets under management, they are growing at a rate of 10% from 31 to 35 lakh crores as on March 2019. Right? I think it is 10% growth we have seen when compared to 2018 to 2019. So total life insurance industry's assets are around 35 lakh crores. Now, out of this, LIC alone accounts for 78% of the total assets under management. LIC alone has 78% of the total assets under management, with 27.61 trillion, accounting for 27.61 trillion. Among the private players, ICICI Pru retained top place. ICICI Pru retained top place with the assets under management of 1,57,236 crores. And then insurance penetration of the industry is remained at 3.7% of the GDP. It is very low, whereas industry density itself is $74. When I say that insurance penetration is calculated as total premiums divided by the GDP. And then insurance density is the ratio of premium to total population. These figures I have taken from the annual report of IRDAI, which is a regulator for insurance industry. So 2018 to 2019 annual report. Then let us see capital markets. Especially I want to touch on the equity side here. Now, listed companies in National Stock Exchange, when it was started somewhere in 1990s, 195 were the listed companies. From that, it has grown to 1931 by the end of March 2019. Then NSE clocked in a turnover of 89.98 trillion rupees in the cash market, with a market capitalization of 112. This is last year's turnover. The number of investors accounts as on 31st August 2020 stood at something like 2,94,211. So roughly 2 crore people opened an trading accounts in the trading. And Demat account, the value of the shares held stood at 196 trillion rupees. Now total FPS, that is foreign portfolio investors, registered in the invested in the calendar year 2019. The amount they invested stood at 1,35,995 crores. This source is National Stock Exchange, and then NSDL, these two, National Securities and Depositories Limited, which is the custodian of the for the opening the Demat accounts. Now quickly I will run through the regulators in the financial services industry. One is that, you know, financial services industry, we have 4 main regulators. One is Security Exchange Board of India, which deals with this regulator's job is to develop, to go for a disciplined, to help the industry in having a disciplined growth. So to see that financial markets grow in a systematic fashion and the investors are not robbed of their money, SEBI take care of that aspect. That is the Securities Exchange Board of India. And then the growth of insurance industry is taken care of by Insurance Regulatory and then Development Authority of India, that is called as IRDAI. And then we have Reserve Bank of India, which is a regulator for the banks. And finally, Pension Fund Regulatory Development Authority, because now we have independent pension system now. So the government established a Pension Fund Regulatory Development Authority. That is here.
Washing machine battle and RM.
Regulators, these are the regulators. And then second aspect is grievance redressal mechanism. So if we are cheated in the financial services industry, whom to approach, how we can solve. And believe me, this ombudsman scheme system is really doing wonderful, especially is working very, very well. There is no time delay here. You can approach the ombudsman, and they have created enough of fear among these respective financial services players. Enough fear in the sense that they are penalized and they are punished whenever they are on the wrong side. Right? If they commit a mistake, this ombudsman is making sure to punish them. So, if you feel that your banker has not given you proper services, or cheated you, or not listening to, or not solving your problem, then you can directly approach the RBI ombudsman. Believe me, RBI ombudsman will respond within 30 days. Your problem will be solved. I personally have made use of this facility for at least 3-4 times for myself and then my friends, and then I got the grievances solved within less than 30 days. So this is a very good system. You can approach RBI ombudsman if bankers are indulging in some are troubling you. Okay, so just you can Google for RBI ombudsman. You will get their details and the mechanism on how to approach them. And similarly, in line with RBI ombudsman, we have insurance ombudsman. And then if some of the stock market people are cheated, they can approach the SEBI. They can write to the Securities Exchange Board of India, because these people are playing a very, very key role in ensuring that the industry grows, and then the interest of the investors is protected. They will respond very promptly without delay, without any delay. And very recent development is that I think 1 or 2 months back, this Pension Fund Regulatory Development of Authority also appointed an ombudsman. But we need to see how it works. It is a very recent establishment. Just before concluding, I want to put a word about National Institute of Securities and then Management. That is NISM. See, nowadays, unless unless people are qualified and then they clear examination done by the NISM, they are not allowed to offer any kind of advice to you, especially about financial services. Right? In the financial services industry, somebody is advising you to buy so and so mutual fund. It means he is a qualified person and he should have cleared the examination conducted by NISM, National Institute of Securities Management. So NISM is doing research on the securities market and then and in the field of education. So everybody who want to be part of the financial services, they need to clear the respective examination. Right? Then this is the pointer. Suppose a professionals like somebody who want to get a job as dealers with a stockbroker, right, or somebody who want to become an LIC advisor or mutual fund advisor, etc., right, or be a research analyst, they need to clear the prescribed examination, and only on obtaining that certificate you will get a recognition as a that particular professional. So with this, I thank you for your patient listening. I hope, I think that I have not taken much of your time. Thank you for your patience listening. If there are any questions, we like to take those questions now.
Yeah, just 1 or 2 minutes for interaction.
Yeah.
Participants can interact, can on your video also. Dr. Panduranga Rao sir is there online. Dr. TKV Srinivas Rao sir is there.
So any questions?
You can stop sharing, Mr. Mazhar. Yeah, now it's okay. Dr. TKV Srinivas Rao sir, if sir is there online, can come in and interact. Just 1 or 2 minutes, that's all. And Madam Sasmita also is there online. There is one question for Sasmita Madam also from Paturi Padmaja, like that. If she is online only, then I will put the question. Otherwise, I don't put this question to Madam. Already Madam and also Mr. Mazhar, they are having their own enterprises. They are very busy. Mr. Mazhar is not even academic man. Madam Sasmita is there into teaching, but Mr. Mazhar is not there. He is a busy person having his own financial consultancy firm, but still has accepted to come online for us. I have a question for Mr. Mazhar.
Please, sir, welcome.
People are nowadays very crazy about Bitcoin. What do you think, and is it the future currency or what?
See, when you consider Bitcoin as a future currency, when you compare it with the currency, I don't have a great opinion about Bitcoin, first of all. And then second point is about currency has two main features. That those things need to be fulfilled. Suppose a currency acts as a store of value, and then currency also legally enforceable. When I say that store of value, suppose after 5 years you want to pay a fee for your higher education, so you put you try to deposit some money in your bank account, right? After let us say 5 lakhs you are depositing. After 5 years you will take that becomes 7 lakhs or 8 lakhs. That 8 lakhs you will go and then give it to the make a payment in the form of a fee, etc., and then that person is bound to accept that. But there is no guarantee that today, instead of saving in the form of deposit, if you put buy a Bitcoin and say that and then say that after 5 years if you go and then pay the fee in the form of Bitcoin, that cannot be legally enforceable, right? So anything which is accepted as a currency need to fulfill two things. One is that it need to be serves as a store of value, and then second point is it need to be legally enforceable. Bitcoin we need not legally enforce that one. And then second important point is Bitcoins now government of India also considering to ban because of the too much speculation. When they say that it is a currency, no currency of the world crashes by 50%, 60% overnight. Right, overnight it won't crash. But in Bitcoin we are seeing too much volatility, and then I think Bitcoins are vulnerable for 50% fall, 20-30% fall in a very short period of time. And then there is one economic principle based on which these Bitcoin prices are going up, because unlike currency, you know, the Bitcoin circulation is very, very limited. Very, very limited. Somebody called Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi Nakamoto, he created this Bitcoin and then left it. And there are, it is believed that there are only 21 million Bitcoins. But the demand for them is coming from across the globe, right? Even from people from India also, they are buying Bitcoin. So here what I see is there is one simple economic principle which is working here. That is, you know, when the demand is, when the supply is limited, but the demand is high, prices are bound to go up. Right? I think that may be happening whenever Bitcoin keeps on moving up. But certainly, I think it is not a currency of the future. And I will not be wrong if I make a bold statement here that in future Bitcoin may go down as the biggest scam of the 21st century. Because what is there in Bitcoin? Suppose say if you have a currency right? That is backed by Government of India, and there are certain systems, etc. Everybody is bound to accept that, right? And then similarly, when you invest in the buy the shares, we are trying to analyze the company in a systematic form. We will see what is that sales figures. We will see how much the company is earning. What is the profitability of the company going to be in future? What are the assets of the company? And then we try to arrive at something called as intrinsic value of that company. And then we try to decide whether we should buy that share at so and so price or not. But in case of Bitcoin, there is nothing, right? There is no universal acceptability. There is no intrinsic value for that. There is no legal enforceability. So nothing is there, just except a craze, actually, craze for speculation.
Yeah, yeah.
Human mind is such that, you know, it tends to get what is that accept speculative or sensational things.
Yeah,
Right?
thank you. Right. Yeah.
I like to.
Good afternoon, Elia Garu.
Sir, good afternoon, sir. Please, go ahead, sir.
Only because my phone was on mute and I could not unmute it.
See, Madam Sasmita is there online, and Mr. Mazhar is also there online.
I have one question to both of the experts. The thing
Yeah.
is, what may be the effect of this COVID-19 and its aftermath on capital formation in countries like India, which are fast developing, because we have already seen a 23.9% decline in GDP. And, there is no guarantee that it is going to return to positive within another 2 quarters. Do you think, as experts, what's your idea about this capital formation?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I got your question, sir. Thank you for the question. All the developing countries are going to be impacted by this COVID crisis. There is no second opinion about that, because all the economies across the world, including India, were almost in a period of, because of the lockdown, almost all the companies for last 3 months, most of them, their revenues are almost zero, something like that. And then, so when the revenues are low, what happens is people may not come forward and then invest. That's how capital formation will happen over a period of time. So I think in a country like India, which is on the cusp of fast growing, post once normalcy reaches, it can be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, right? Whenever normalcy reaches, it is going to take time, because countries like India with a smaller GDP levels, they need to depend more on the debt funds. That they need to borrow maybe at times from the outside the country also. I think already we have a debt to GDP ratio of 80%. That is one point. And then second point is that the countries, that the rich countries are also impacted because of the crisis. So they may not be very generous to give to the developing countries as they used to give earlier. Right, because India is a $3 trillion company, just a $3 trillion country, whereas USA is a $24 trillion economy, and then China is a $14 trillion economy. Okay, so we may say that USA with the $24, which is something like 8%, 8 times higher than the Indian economy, they can generously lend to us. But the fact is that their country is also seeing the worst impact because of the credit crisis, because of the COVID crisis. So first, their preference is going to be set right, their houses in order. I believe that. And the second point is because of the COVID, now what is happening is deglobalization, something called as deglobalization is picking up. So because of the deglobalization thing, people are looking more and more inwards into their countries rather than looking for others. So there is an impact. Whatever figure or whatever estimation we are going to give here, or any economist, including RBI governor or chief economic advisor, whoever he may be, they are just at best, they are called as guesstimates. That is educated guesses. They are just mere guesstimates, and the real impact, how much impact we have happened, We will come to know maybe after 6 months. After 6 months or 9 months, the impact we will able to assess. Once we make a realistic assessment of that, then only we will be able to observe how much money we need actually to pump into the economy so that we can revive it. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I totally agree with what Mr. Mazhar said. Things we are not going to know right now what is the position of the economies, right? We are just making a calculation, a rough calculation. But yes, some of the sectors are speeding up, like e-commerce. If you talk about, this is one of the sector which is coming up slowly and steadily. No, people are going online, buying things. So some certain things are coming to regularization. It will definitely take time. It won't happen within a fraction of second or within few months. It may take maybe 6 months or a year till this COVID situation comes in control. But yes, there are certain players which are making their market, and definitely that is definitely going to make some income to India also, right? Yeah, definitely. So there would be some players who will capture the market, and they will slowly grow the market.
Dr. TKV sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, madam is also an expert in soft skills. She has her own enterprise there in Mumbai, training people in the communication skills, personal grooming, etiquette, life skills, and so on. When requested, madam has accepted our invitation, and madam has come online today, exactly at 9:45 a.m.
In fact, I had a lecture in the morning.
Yeah. Thank you, madam. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
And Mr. Mazhar also, thank you for showing some academic interest also, in spite of having your own business venture there in Hyderabad. I see.
It's a pleasure, sir.
Yeah, I see Madam Padmavati also online, who has put one question in chat box. If she is there online, she can come and ask the question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, madam. Madam Sasmita is there online. You can put the question directly.
Yes. Madam, earlier I had put in a chat box a question to you. Okay, so now I have got the opportunity to ask again. Okay, yes. Madam, this you spoke about e-commerce, so I just wanted to know, in the background of this inequality as a chronic problem in Indian economy, inequality in terms of income, or in terms of technology, in terms of accessibility. So, yes. Will this growth in e-commerce widen the gap of this inequality, especially in terms of technology accessibility? Only those who are able to cater to these facilities enjoy e-commerce, and what about the others? So what is your opinion about inequality as a problem and the future of it?
Yes, I believe when we talk about, you are talking about inequality, we talk about the telecom services, right? If you talk about Reliance, Jio, right? They have reached to the very, very deep segments, they have reached even the villages. People are having at least a smartphone, and they are they're at a lower price. There are so many companies who are coming up, who are providing a smartphone which is at an affordable price, and I feel every house has at least one smartphone. Not every person may be having, but yes, even at least one person is having. Today, you talk about online education. It has started somehow. It is taking. It is growing. People are reaching students. They are teaching students, right? This would not have been possible if there was nothing available. It will take time. Of course, it will take time. With inequality, you talk. Slowly and steadily, people are buying those kinds of things. Not only you don't require a laptop, you don't require a tab, right? You just require internet connection. I think so with Airtel and all is providing internet connection, or Jio is just free when you buy a Jio phone. the internet connection is totally free. Whatever you buy, the internet pack, what you get, that is free. So yes, somewhere it will take time, but yes, it is reaching people.
Yeah, thank you, madam. Thank you for that, and hope madam has answered your question, madam.
Dr.
Yes, sir,
Alia,
yes.
I have a
Thank you.
small observation.
Sure, sir. Sure.
Yes.
This is becoming a traditional question for everyone about this widening gap or this difference or division between India and Bharat, all these things. When computers were introduced in 1980s,
Sir.
the same objection was made.
Yeah.
That it would widen the gap.
Yeah.
What did it widen the gap? No. When in the beginning, when mobile phones were introduced, the same question was raised.
Yeah.
It would raise the gap between the haves and have-nots.
Sir.
Did it happen? No. When LPG came into existence in 1991, they told the same thing. But in the beginning, it will widen the gap between anything. But afterwards, the house will percolate. It will percolate down to common man. So there is no fear that this would widen the gap, because in India, this widening the gap, the difference index, some index is there. It is not so much great as that of the USA. So we need not be afraid of all these.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Madam Padmaja is already waiting for us to conclude this. Over to you, madam. Madam Padmaja. Madam, could you please unmute? You are on mute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It is so wonderful to have 3 members as resource persons today, sir. Really, it is fantastic. Particularly when Madam has shown the Madam Sudha Murthy's picture in the first slide itself, I felt very happy. Yesterday night only I have seen one small video. It seems every year, at least one day, she spends as a vendor in selling the vegetables near the temple. Just like an ordinary woman, she is sitting near the temple and then she is selling her vegetables. And then that means they want to see how the laymen also earning, and then they are leading their lives in their particular fashion. So it is so wonderful. On the other hand, Madam, your smile is so beautiful. I'm very much impressed. And then being a technical and then soft skills trainer, it has given a great encouragement to us. So thank you very much, ma'am. And also Teki sir has given a wonderful session, though he could not show his PPT, but still because of his experience of 28 years of experience, he could give a vivid picture about
Madam,
the Indian economy as well as.
Madam.
And also,
Padmaja, madam.
Muhammad sir, I can't explain in words. So, in order to explain all these 3 persons, now I request our beloved colleague, M. Srinivas sir, Head of the Department Commerce, to propose vote of thanks. Thank you, sir. Over to Srinivas sir.
Yeah, sir is there online. Hello. Yeah, he has come online, madam.
Okay,
Sir,
thank you, sir.
I am live. Okay, listen to me, sir.
Yeah, it's audible.
Okay, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my vote of thanks. So today I have conducted a good webinar on commerce subject. At least 75% people participated. Thank you very much to the participants. And also at first, very thankful to Sri Ramesh Garu, Professor of English, Arts and Commerce Scholars, Adhikaran University. But sir is unable to attend the meeting. Thank you very much, sir. And also, our first lecture, Dr. Susna Madam, gave a wonderful and powerful presentation on e-commerce, which is useful not only to the commerce students, but also to the entire population, whole nation. Now we are doing e-commerce business at the at the time of pandemic COVID-19. Now at this time, our economy is rising once again with the help of e-commerce. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your giving good opportunity to us to listen to our class. Thank you very much, ma'am. And also, our professor, sir, Professor Teki, sir, presented his lecture on Indian finance system and also carbon financing, which is an international topic to be covered everywhere, in every scenario. The topic is very hot now in the place of green budgeting also. And the third person, Mazhar sir, gave a wonderful lecture, especially he is not an academician, but as an academician and also as a professor, he gave a wonderful lecture. And also it is very useful to everybody. And also he covered everything, the siblings of financial system, and also especially now trend is going on shares, mutual funds, and what not everything in the financial system is covered. A wonderful lecture. Thank you very much, sir. And also we are very thankful to our principal ma'am, Vasant Rashmi Garu, for her for her kind cooperation to conduct this webinar, and also Padmaja ma'am who conducted this webinar very effectively. And also the entire credit goes to my beloved friend Dr. Elias sir. Thank you very much, sir. And also Vijay Kumar sir, Yeshwar ma'am, Ashwalata ma'am, Anya sir, all our colleagues are thanks very much. And also our participants who are the reason and responsible to conduct this webinar successfully. Thank you very much for your great participation. And
Madam Sasmita.
Yes, sir.
I should thank you personally because I have changed dates 3 times.
Yes.
It's okay.
But still you have accepted our invitation and you have come online.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I changed dates 3 times due to small inconvenience here.
Yes.
Because of state government exams.
Yes.
But still you are kind enough to come online and deliver a wonderful lecture for us.
Powerful lecture, not wonderful, powerful.
Yeah, and we look forward as a college. We look forward working with you.
Yes, for sure, sir.
And same is the case with Mr. Mazhar also. We look forward working with you.
Yes.
And we congratulate you for your academic interest.
The last request, the participants request to submit their feedback forms and they will receive their certificates within 2 days.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, one and all. With this, we conclude this.
Principal madam has come online just now from college.
Yes.
Principal madam has come online from college.
Would you like to speak some words?
Yeah, madam wants to say something.
Yes.
Thank you very much to all of you, to the resource persons for enriching our knowledge. Actually, today is Ozone Day. Unexpectedly, we have talking about the ozone, carbon pollution and the pollution and all things are also we have touched because of the Teki sir. Thanks to the resource persons, all of us discuss about not only the commerce but also the ozone day purpose.
Yeah, small announcement.
Thanks to all resource persons, sir.
Yes, madam. Small announcement regarding feedback. Feedback link will expire 18th morning by 10:30. So you have to fill the feedback form before 18th morning itself. Later, please don't say send me the feedback link. We want to fill it. Okay. So that is my request for all the participants. Today and tomorrow you have time. Please fill the feedback form so that you get the certificate. And we give certificates. Please allow us a couple of days time to send the certificates. That is the only announcement. Okay. And I thank Dr. T.K. Srinivasarao sir for the interaction.
Yes. Very good query.
Sir has come online and interacting with the resource persons. Sir has wide knowledge in various subjects. Dr. T.K. Srinivasarao sir, thank you so much. And Madam Principal, Madam Anantalakshmi Garu, if anything Madam has to say, then we will see. Otherwise, I will end the meeting.
Yes.
Nothing, sir. I want to thank all the participants for actively participating in our seminar. And also thankful to all our staff members for successfully completing this seminar. Even though we have exams, all are cooperated for both the exams and seminar also. Thank you very much.
Especially,
Congratulations to
Madam Sasmita has patiently waited till the end of this webinar.
Okay, sir.
So thank you all. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your encouragement. I am ending the meeting.
Okay, sir.
I am ending the meeting. Thank you all.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm very sorry, sir. I was in conference. Okay.